Okay, folks, we got a new chapter here. I don't want to make anybody feel bad up north, but we got a nice warm day today. It's probably 62 above. And I've got two Reatas here I got to prepare to pull. And we're going to video the whole thing, and it'll take a while because you got to let Mother Nature help you out. But this particular Reata is a 5/16. And if you look down at the end down there, you'll see how long it is. You'll see it move at the very end. This one's 86 feet long. And you don't run into an 86-foot Reata that often these days, but I've got one. And the first phase of this deal is to get what we call the sable, which is Mexican for fat. And it's the kidney fat. And what I'll do is I'll be putting this kidney fat on by hand. And then I take these down in the afternoon when the sun starts to go down. Then I bring them back out when the sun's up good, about 9 or 10 o'clock when it starts to warm up. And every chance I get when I'm around, I'll be putting them out here and hanging them. And you want to make sure you're at least a foot over the height of your tallest dog. And this here, this is kidney fat. People get confused about thinking it comes from the actual kidney of a cow. This is fat that's deposited inside the carcass about where the kidneys are. So when you're butchering next week and you got one hung up with a backhoe and you slit it and dump the guts out, look back up in the cavity, and that's when you'll see this snow white fat up in there, and that's the kidney fat. That's what we use to treat these with because it doesn't have the meat on it, it's just the fat. So you just basically take it with your hand and rub it. And it'll start to coat it. And then every day I'll hang this. That'll give me the coating I need and let the sun cook it inside the Reata. So it's just a matter of doing this. And that's why a lot of people get in trouble. They buy a Reata. There's lots of ways of doing this, like everything that has to do with cowboying. This is the process I do. A lot of guys, especially Reatas made up in the United States, guys that are working on outfits, they take the Reata when they're at a branding and they stick it down the water trough. This is a rawhide Reata, mind you. And the bubbles come up. When the bubbles quit coming up, then you take it back out and you start roping with it because it softens it up. So now you do that, and if you're branding season, you may brand for 3 weeks, 2 months. By the time you're all done, it's broke in. Well, 99% of the people that are interested in these don't brand that many calves. So the Reatas I get, what I do is I pull them, and I'll explain that in another video. But right now we're just getting this prepared. And all I'm doing is getting this fat on here. And if you look at the two Reatas, maybe you can see the difference in the diameter. This one is a 5/16 and this one is a 3/8. Now these were two different makers, I can tell just by the feel of them. And this is a Sonoran Reata. This is my favorite from Sonora, Mexico. This is braided tighter and smaller, little smaller strings, thickness-wise. And I'll be curious to see how it throws. But this is how it works, folks. This is what I do. After this, after it's been out in the sun several days, then I'll what we call pull it, and I do that horseback. And I have to do it on a clean area. I can't do it here on this dirt. So I have to go down to the ranch headquarters where they actually got some grass, and I can pull it down there. Now to get a Reata nice and pliable to use the rope, it's all about friction. There again, you're back to science. You know, the bridle bit's fulcrum and leverage. Well, this is all about friction. When I pull this Reata through this hardwood limb I've got a mesquite one and I've got an oak one. As it goes through the holes, a series of holes, by pulling it, the friction heats up the Reata, and that's what drives the kidney fat into the corazon, into the heart of the Reata. Now right here, this is the end of the 60-footer right here. Up there is the end of the 86-footer, so I'd give you an idea of the length here. I don't know if you can see the difference, but this is the one with the fat on it, and this is the one with no fat on it. Now this kidney fat, what we'll do is whatever I don't use, I can keep this out and just put it in the shed where it's cool and it won't spoil. It won't go rancid. Then the other piece I'll put back in the freezer. Here's the other. Now this one's thicker. And I'll show you when I pull it, but one of the things about pulling them is as I run my thumb down here, I can feel all the bumps from the 4 strands. And when you get done pulling them, you can hardly feel the bumps. It's a lot smoother. And that's what's so important about this, because when you slide rope, if you don't get rid of those bumps, you're going to tear your horn wrap is going to disappear pretty fast. But the smoother you can get these, the more slide you got. Well, the thing about the news of having more slide is that you better be good at sliding rope and know how, because it can get a little fast. But if you know what you're doing, it feels really great. It's not a problem. So that piece I had in my hand is about shot. That's about it now. And since I'm an environmentalist, my friends the ravens will come and pick that up. That's what that's for. There's the second piece. Like everything else, these Reatas are getting hard to come by because of the lack of vaqueros making them. So they're getting to be kind of an item. People always ask me, when do I always use a Reata? No, I don't. Fact is, I very seldom get an opportunity to use a Reata. Out in the pasture in the summertime, that's my favorite thing. But I'm sure you've seen our videos of us branding, and to use a Reata correctly, for me, it's like they're designed for nice long shots. And when you brand in small corrals, you don't have all that luxury of having all that distance. And of course, this was designed for the outside world and the rodeer style branding. And which reminds me, something that you might want to know is that in the early days of the ranchos, the Dons were the Spaniards that had the land grants. And the sons of the Dons were the Spanish children who over time intermarried. And anyway, it was a status thing. Anyway, these young men, they get up in the morning, and they'd have the Don's horse saddled, And the men would go out on their horses and they'd spend the day out with the cattle. And what I finally read was a typical thing that might happen is they'll take a crew of 20 vaqueros and they'll go up and clean the drainage. I've showed it to you before, but if you look across the valley over there, there's a big open canyon. That would be a drainage. And so early in the morning, the Dons, they would go out as a crew, and then they would split the crew up and they would ride up to the top and the sides of that and they'd gather that whole thing. When they brought the cattle down, they'd have what we call a rodeer now. What they called a partada, which means stop. So they would stop the cattle. They'd pick a tree or a big rock or a creek or a certain spot down there on the flat, and that's where they held the cattle. So now all the riders came back and they had all the cattle standing there, and they'd rodeer them. Rodeo means to go around. And they would go around and they'd watch for something cutting out and they'd run up there and spin it back, send it back to the herd. And they'd get those cattle to stand in one place. Then at the Don's command, or the segundo, he'd just ride away. And that was your signal for everybody to ride away from the cattle and leave them alone. And this was all done quietly, incidentally. So now they ride away and the cattle start grazing again. They can go back up to their grazing, whatever they wanted to do. And they did this a lot back then because there weren't any fences, but there was a lot of canyons. So now the annual roundup that I told you about, when it came time for the roundup, you could tell the good ranchos with the good vaqueros because they'd get up the top of them canyons and start those cattle, and them cattle would go right to the rodeer grounds and stand there because they weren't threatened by it. All they did was before, they were just showing them where to be. And I've always remembered that. And like when I'm done with a set of cattle in corrals, if it's not cows and calves, because you can't do it with little calves, if it's just cows or yearlings, after I'm done working them, I might just tell everybody, let's go. Just load up and leave. Now the gates are open. So these cattle walk out on their own. And there's certain situations where instead of people getting behind yelling at them to get out of the corral, it's so much nicer just to disappear and let them walk out of the corral. Now, there was a man told me one time, he was a truck driver. He told me about hauling lambs. I don't know if you've ever loaded lambs, but loading lambs can go really well or really bad. But when he wanted to unload the truck, he would back his semi up to the chute. Then he'd crawl through the truck and open all the gates, get back out of the truck, go up in the truck and take a nap. When he woke up, all the lambs were out. They walked out on their own. So livestock are pretty smart. Anyway, it's low stress stock handling is what it amounts to. Now I've just got 2 Reatas greased, and that I won't grease them again probably because this sable is a little bit cooler weather than usual, so it's going on really thick. And you don't want it so thick that it doesn't cause any friction. So by the time I pull this, I'll be able to get some friction. And that'll be the next video about this. Thank you. And folks, just as a preview to let you know, this is what I use to pull a Reata. The Reatas I get are usually too stiff to use because they're fresh made. So I do what we call pull them. And the end is going to go through these holes, and I'll go through 1, 3, and 5 probably to start. And I'm going to make a video about pulling, but we just wanted to show you this part. And I just hang it over a post. And I like to hang it up high so that when I ride up on my horse, I can grab the end and take off and pull it. Now the deal is, this is oak. Okay? Come over here. And these were just straight drilled holes when I started a few years ago. Now they're getting kind of rounded. Well, the object is the more you go in and out of these holes against hard wood, the more friction, the hotter the Reata gets, and that drives the kidney fat, the sabo, into the center of the Reata. That's why they last forever. Another way of doing it is like this. I've been known to pull them that way too. So this is just a preview. I've got a mesquite limb and I got an oak limb. They're both exactly the same, but you got to use a piece of hardwood. And anyway, stay tuned, because that's what coming up pretty soon is pulling Reatas. Thank you.